My dad lost a lot of money which he invested in shrimp farming. I told him, don't do that. But he still went ahead and did that. Much more tragic is my sister's father in law. He died of a massive heart attack because he'd invested all his hard earned life savings with someone, promised him to give with good returns. But finally, he could not give and he lost all his money and he died of a massive heart attack. There are many such stories in many homes in India and abroad where investors have invested their hard earned money, but they have lost it all. Not just that, sometimes many have so much wealth, but they cannot use it. And finally, there are those who keep their money invested for years and years and not getting any returns. So, this is the way you lose your wealth. So, basically, there are three things that matter when you do your investing. And those three things we will talk about today. What are those three things? You remember those three things, and you will never lose your wealth. In fact, you will keep gaining returns upon returns and grow your wealth if you remember these three things when it comes to investing. I'm Frankie Fernandez, a financial coach and also a marriage coach. My goal and mission is to help young families to grow their wealth and also their relationship. And when you lose your hard earned money, it not just affects you who's investing, but also your family, your wife, your husband, your children, and even your next generations. So it is very important that you be very careful about how you invest and where you invest. And that's what we're going to learn in today's video. So I urge you again, as always, sit with your spouse. Take a pen, take a notebook, or have your computer ready and make notes. These are very important lessons that I have learned over the last 3 decades. Not only as somebody who's worked in the financial services, but also who's married for 23 years. So let's get into this session. So number one, safety. Let me give you an example, an analogy. Just imagine you have to travel from Hyderabad to Mumbai. I live in Hyderabad and I would like to travel to Mumbai. And someone promises me to take by cab in 5 hours. Should I go? Knowing that it takes 13 hours to reach. Yes, if somebody says 12 hours, I can still believe. But 5 hours, what will I be compromising? I'll be compromising safety. If at all is able to manage to drop me in 5 hours. Isn't this what we do for our investments? We are willing to invest for the sake of high returns, not asking if that investment is safe. What about flying in an aeroplane? Would you fly in an aeroplane where the pilot is a very new pilot? He's actually under training. Would you risk your life? But he promises you to take you at the cost of a train. Come on. Would you go? You wouldn't go because it's not safe. You're compromising on the safety, right? But that's what we do in our investments. Many times you're willing to invest in options that are not safe just because they will give good returns. Now, safety is very important when you do your investments. But how do we find out if an investment is a safe option? Always find out with whoever or wherever you invest, if that organization, that institution, or that person is accountable to someone. Is that investment option regulated? For example, when you invest in a bank, when you invest in an FD in a bank, is it safe? Yes, it's safe. And we have seen over the years, especially if you invest in a public sector bank like SBI or a private sector bank, a profitable private sector bank, our money is safe. Why? Because it is regulated by RBI, Reserve Bank of India. what was the problem with the investments where my father invested in a shrimp farming? Now, something like shrimp farming and a lot of other plantations, etc., a lot of these investment options promise higher returns. The problem is that the shrimp farming where my father invested was not regulated. It promised very high returns. In fact, when my father showed me his certificates and he says, I have invested, I told him, you should not have. Do not invest. Take back your money because it's not safe. But my father didn't listen to me. He nevertheless continued his investments. And he said that, see, in the first quarter or the first half year, see the returns I have got. And I knew that initially they will show high returns, but later on he lost his principal. Same problem was with my sister's father-in-law, who lost most of his wealth because he'd invested with somebody who was not regulated. So when you invest, this is the first question you should always ask. Is this investment option regulated by RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, or SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India? What is SEBI? SEBI is a governing body. It is formed by the Government of India to oversee the Indian securities market, including mutual funds, stock market, and other financial institutions. So SEBI and RBI are governing bodies, and they are like the watchdog. They are looking at the institutions to safeguard the investors' money. This is the very reason why mutual funds and stock markets and banks are preferred investment options. Although in many banks, for example, FDs may not give you high returns, but they are preferred because they are safe. And stocks and mutual funds are also preferred investments, not just because they give you high returns, but because they are safe options. And we will talk about returns in a little while. Safety should not be confused with returns. For example, a question comes, will I get good returns? Will my money grow? And if somebody says, no, there is a risk, your money may not grow in the first 1 or 2 years, it may take time. But the question is it safe? Yes. Safety doesn't mean it will give you high returns. Safety simply means your money is safeguarded. If you keep your money for a while, for a few years, you will get back some returns at least. You will not lose your money. So next time someone calls you up, or if a friend or a relative visits you and promises you something that will give you high returns, first ask the question, is this regulated? Who is the regulator? Is RBI the regulator or SEBI? Or who? Is the government of India promising? Is this guaranteed by the government of India? Only then invest, because then your money is safe. Many years ago, a friend of mine was selling some investment options to an old man. So this friend of mine who was selling promised him to give good returns, and he also showed him a prospectus showing the huge building where they operated. But after a few years, the money was gone. That company became a bankrupt. So he lost most of his hard-earned money. So many lose their money in this way because they fall prey for the promises of high returns. Yes, you can get high returns and also safety. You don't have to compromise on safety for high returns. So what are the safe options in India? Of course, the banks. The banks are regulated by RBI. And if you invest in the public sector banks like SBI, State Bank of India, or some good profitable banks, strong banks, some of these banks, your money is safe. You can invest here and don't have to worry. There are other options like the PPF, Public Provident Fund, or your EPF. They're all guaranteed by the government. Then real estate, they're also regulated by the Real Estate Act. And the states are responsible for the money that you've invested in real estate. Then there are mutual funds and stocks. They're regulated by SEBI, and your money is safe there. So safety is the number one thing you should always look before investing. Do not compromise on safety, because otherwise you will lose your hard earned money just because you wanted high returns. Now let's move to the second thing that you need to remember when you invest. That is liquidity. What is liquidity? So liquidity basically means how soon you can convert your asset into cash without affecting the market price of that asset. In simple words, when you need money in emergency, you should be able to access this money and quickly be able to use it for the purpose. We all know that the most liquid asset is cash, hard cash, which is at home, or cash that is in the bank savings account where you can withdraw by the use of an ATM. Now, why is liquidity so important? It's very simple. You need money to buy anything instantly. If you want to buy something, if you want to make purchases, if you want to give somebody in an emergency, you need hard cash. And it is very important that you need cash and not investments. For example, if you have a flat tire in the middle of the road and you call somebody to repair your tires, can you tell him, I have investments in equities, I've got investments in the stock market and mutual funds, I'll give you after selling them? No. The person who's repairing needs this hard cash. That is why liquidity is important. Liquidity is that you can give the money to somebody who needs it, that is, give the money for the transaction you have made. Now, let me talk a little bit about some of the illiquid assets, and probably you'll be able to understand the importance of liquidity. Just imagine you have a property worth 1 crore and it is at a very good location, prime location. The property is worth 1 crore. Next 3 or 4 days, you need to make payment for your child's higher education and you need 30 lakhs. Now, what do? You need to pay the fees in the next 1 week. Will you sell your property? Or can you sell your property in a week's time? Let's assume that you are able to sell your property in a week's time and get the money, probably some advance. But tell me, will you get the right price? You will not get the right price. You will not get the market price. You will get something which is lower than the market price because you are selling in panic, because you need liquidity. This is liquidity. But your asset, which is a property, is illiquid. So property is the best example of an illiquid asset. So now what are the examples of liquid or illiquid assets? What are the liquid investments? Cash, cash in hand, cash in the bank, mutual funds, stocks, gold, fixed deposits. These are all examples of liquid investments. Some examples of illiquid investments: property, we just talked about; sovereign gold bonds, which have a lock-in period of 8 years; then public provident fund has a lock-in period of 15 years. So these are all examples of illiquid investments. Now, is it okay to have illiquid investments? It's perfectly fine as long as they are safe. But ensure that they are a small part of your portfolio. You must have liquid assets. For example, in emergencies, you need liquid investments. So all your emergency fund requirements should be in an FD or liquid mutual funds so that you can withdraw it immediately. Yes, you can always have property and sovereign gold bonds, public provident fund. They're all examples of safe investments, but they are not liquid, but that is fine. They will give you good returns over a long period. So it is fine to have a part of your investments in illiquid assets. And the good thing is that after the 15-year lock-in period or after the 8-year lock-in period, they're liquid. So they're not really bad investments. So always ensure that your investments are liquid. You should be able to liquidate it when you need it. So that was number 2. And now comes number 3. And I would consider this number 3 as a very important part of your investments, because that's why you invest. And what is that number 3? So point number 3, returns. In fact, returns is the very reason why we invest. In fact, you are investing for returns. You're not just setting aside money and keeping it. You could do it in your locker, but you are taking that money and investing so that it grows. And it can only grow if it gives you returns. And just like in life, we have opponents to good health. And what are the challenges for good health? Infection. So we need to fight our infection using supplements and medicines and exercises, etc. Right? So same way, there are opponents to returns. There are opponents to good returns, and that is called as inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is the rise in the prices of goods and services. What costs today 1,000 rupees will cost 2,000 rupees in the next 10 years if the inflation is 7%. And just imagine if the inflation is more, it will double in less number of years. So you need to get returns which will be more than inflation. You should be able to beat inflation. So the investment products where you're going to invest should beat inflation, especially for your long term financial goals, which are in the distant future, in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You must invest in instruments which will beat inflation. You can watch this video where I have explained very clearly how to do your financial planning, your goals. What are the three important components? The time, what is the time horizon? The short term, the medium term, and the long term time horizon. Remember, only when you beat inflation, your investment grows. So your returns should be higher than inflation. Right now in India, the inflation is roughly 5 to 6%, which means your returns on the investment options should be more than 5 or 6%, or else you don't get any returns. Your money remains the same. In fact, if your interest rate is less than 5 6%, like a savings account, if you keep most of your money into savings account, which gives you 3 to 4% interest, you're actually losing your money. So now what are the good investment options that beat inflation and give you good return? Public provident fund, yes. A public provident fund is a very good investment option which helps you save taxes, and also it gives you more than 7% interest. Your EPF, your Employees Provident Fund, which gives you more than 8% returns, they also beat inflation. Then gold, which is roughly maybe 8 to 10% or more. And then SGB, sovereign gold bonds, they also beat inflation. Although there is a lock-in period, they're not so liquid, but they give you good returns and they're also safe. Then the stocks, shares, mutual funds, then within the mutual funds, the equity mutual funds, and then the debt mutual funds, hybrid mutual funds, corporate bond debt mutual funds, which will give you more than FD returns. Then there are the long duration funds, the gilt funds, then the ETFs. These are all examples of investment options that will beat inflation. They will give you good returns. And these are all long term investment options. They are useful for long term financial goals, which are 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Take advantage of compounding by staying invested for more number of years. So always remember the relationship between returns and the number of years you stay invested. For example, 1 lakh rupees at 5% compounding interest for 20 years will make your money 2,65,000 rupees. But the same 1 lakh for 20 years at, at 10% will give you 7 lakhs. At 15% compounding will give you 16 lakhs. See the difference? Even 1% interest when compounded over a number of years can make a big difference. So always ensure if you're investing for long term, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, always go for instruments which give you high returns. Of course, they should be safe, like stocks or mutual funds. These are really the engine for the growth of your wealth. So always remember, if you're investing for long term, and of course, when you're investing in long term, with high interest, you have to sacrifice liquidity. That is where you do not look for highly liquid instruments, but you look for returns. That's why I mentioned that always set aside money, liquid money, for emergencies or when you are nearing your financial goals. For example, if when you invested your money 15 years ago for your child's higher education, and now this year or in the next year, you have your child's higher studies fees to be paid, you must withdraw and invest it into a liquid fund. So your money has to be liquid. I've done a video where you can watch financial goals too close. Watch that video, it will help you understand the relationship between returns and liquidity. So a good returns is a very important characteristics of an investment options. So let's quickly summarize the three things. Do you remember the three things? Take a pause and think, what are those three things? Number one, remember the car, the cab. If somebody promises you to drop you to a destination in less time, your safety is compromised. Same thing goes with your investment. So safety is very important. You should get your money back. Then second, we talked about liquidity. You need liquid hard cash when the need comes, like emergencies, or if you have to pay the fees of your children, or anything that you need to pay money, you need liquid cash. You cannot depend on investments that are illiquid, like a property or PPF or some of those instruments that are locked, that have lock-in period. And finally, we talked about returns. Now, which of these three would you consider important? Take a moment and think about it. Obviously, safety. Even if you reach your destination slow, it's fine. At least you reach safely. So it is very important that your money is safe. Then comes returns. As I mentioned earlier, you should be willing to sacrifice your liquidity for good returns. And there is a way out. As I mentioned, set aside money in liquid investment options so that you can focus on returns. And finally, of course, liquidity is also important. Although the order is safety, returns, and liquidity, in my opinion, they all three are important. And one is to decide between returns and liquidity what is important in a given point in time. But all three are important. Even if one is missing, you'll not grow your wealth. You lose your hard-earned money. As I already mentioned, if your investment option is not safe, you lose your money. If your investment does not give you good returns and you cannot beat inflation, again, you are actually losing your money. And finally, liquidity. When you cannot withdraw your funds when you need it, but you withdraw it at a loss, you want the money in panic, you again lose. So you lose on three counts. So ensure that your investment option has all these three. I hope you learned something from this session. If you really learned, please give a like and also subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I will keep posting videos which are useful for growing your wealth and your relationship. So see you soon.